In mid-2021, John Mello told Zachary Hughes that his ex, Christina Parcell, was a prostitute and a junkie, that she and her new boyfriend, Bradley Post, were abusing his daughter Aida, and that he feared for her life. According to Zach, John even offered him $10,000 to carry out a contract killing. As a Christian, he was offended at the idea of taking another man's life for money. In fact, he told John he wouldn't do it for all the money in the world. But even so, he said he'd consider it on one condition: if John could prove the allegations were true. A few months later, a man wearing a dark hoodie carrying a bouquet of roses entered Christina's home and violently stabbed her in the head, neck, and chest nearly 36 times before making what he thought was a clean getaway. Before continuing on, we would like to point out that the aforementioned allegations of abuse have yet to be substantiated in a court of law. Before we begin, we would like to send our sincere condolences to the victim's family. Zachary David Hughes was born in Morro Bay, California in 1992. We don't know much about his early childhood, but he, his parents, and his brother Eli moved 2,500 miles or 4,025 kilometers east to Abington, Virginia when he was 11 years old. As traditional Christians, Zach's parents raised their sons to have strong values and work ethics. They also taught them how important it was to help those less fortunate than they were. As such, Zach's parents adopted 5 siblings from Russia shortly after making the cross-country move from California to Virginia. Everyone knew there would be a long and rocky adjustment period. The government-run Russian adoption agency never told the Hughes that the children had developed serious emotional and psychological problems after enduring years of unspeakable abuse. In many respects, the Russian children brought untold stress and turmoil to the formerly peaceful household. This was particularly true of the oldest girl named Grace, who Zach later described as an amoral psychopath. To cope, Zach turned to the piano. He took piano lessons in California before they had left, but his quest to become a world-class pianist really took off when his parents bought a $300 piano from a yard sale in Abington, Virginia. To be clear, the piano was more than just a musical instrument for Zach. It was the one thing that allowed him to express his creativity and to escape the constant stress in the home. Zach's natural musical talent shone through from the very beginning. As a teenager, he won first place in the prestigious Southeastern Piano Festival, an annual event held at the University of South Carolina School of Music in Columbia. The award even earned him a solo performance with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra, during which he played Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5. Then, in 2010, he was accepted at the uber-exclusive Juilliard School for Piano Performance in New York City. Zach was such a phenomenon that he was awarded a number of scholarships that are typically reserved for the best of the best. Later, in 2017, he became the principal pianist for the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra in Knoxville, Tennessee. By then, Zach had achieved far more than most aspiring pianists could ever dream of. But later that year, he decided to give it all up to pursue something he held in even higher regard. Zach had been thinking about serving his country for some time, and he eventually settled on becoming a U.S. Marine because he knew it was the biggest and most rewarding challenge of all. The recruiters pushed him into the officer candidate program because he already had a college degree. Zach was in the top 3% of his class of nearly 400 candidates, but hairline fractures in his leg bones forced him to drop out before completing the program. His instructors urged him to take some time off, to let his legs heal and then come back when he was healthy. Zach went to stay with his family now in Travelers Rest, South Carolina in 2019, but he never went back to the Marine Corps. Once again, Zach turned to the piano to see him through a stressful and uncertain period in his life. He eventually got a permit to play the piano in public. One evening in 2020, an Italian man named John Mello and his young daughter Aida approached him and introduced themselves while he was performing. John asked Zach if he would play Clair de Lune for Aida. He obliged, and the three eventually became good friends. John even attended Zach's birthday party a few months later in October. It was a fun and festive evening, but before leaving, John pulled Zach aside and told him some troubling news. He said that Aida was away on a trip with her mother and that he suspected she and her new boyfriend were abusing her. John told Zach that he had begun dating a woman named Christina Parcell in 2008 and that they had a rocky relationship, but that Christina gave birth to their daughter in 2012. John and Christina split up shortly thereafter and became entangled in a contentious custody battle. John said that Christina didn't even want their daughter and that she was only fighting for custody out of spite for him. He also claimed that Christina was a drug user and a paid escort. The court granted John custody in 2016, but Christina still saw her daughter regularly and he wasn't allowed to take her out of the country. That year, Christina began dating a man named Bradley Post, and almost immediately, John began to suspect that they were abusing his daughter. The situation got so dire in his opinion by the fall of 2020 that he defied the court order and took Aida to Italy. Christina did everything she could to track them down and to bring her back to the United States, but it was a long, drawn-out process. During the ordeal, Bradley Post supported her financially and emotionally. Zach lost touch with John and Aida while they were in Italy, and in many respects, he was glad to be free of their family drama. Christina and Bradley got engaged in early 2021, and later that year, the Italian government ruled that Aida had to be returned to the United States pending the outcome of the ongoing custody battle. John eventually reached out to Zach and told him what was going on. With Aida back with her mother in Greenville, South Carolina, he feared for her safety more than ever. At that point, Zach wasn't even sure if John's claims of abuse were true. For all he knew, he was exaggerating or making the whole thing up because he apparently hated Christina as much as she hated him. Whatever the case, John showed Zach a number of escort ads that he claimed were linked to Christina. He also showed him a family court transcript in which she invoked the Fifth Amendment right when asked if she was a prostitute and/or a drug user. Later, Zach and John allegedly posted nude photos of Christina online without her permission, apparently in an attempt to get her to drop her custody claim. In the end, John convinced Zach that Christina and Bradley Post were abusing Aida, and that his daughter's life was in imminent danger, and that the only way to put an end to the abuse and save her life was to kill Christina. According to Zach, John initially offered him $5,000 to do it, but when he said he wouldn't do it for any price, John allegedly upped his offer to $10,000. Interestingly, part of the reason Zach ultimately bought John's story was that his descriptions of Christina's personality and behavior reminded him of his troubled Russian sister, Grace. 41-year-old Christina Parcell walked her daughter to school at approximately 7:30 a.m. on the morning of Wednesday, October 13, 2021. After that, she returned to the home that she shared with her sister, Lutina, at 122 Canebrake Drive in Greer, South Carolina. Lutina wasn't there, but Christina immediately began getting ready for an important job interview she had scheduled for later that morning. According to some sources, she actually went to the interview and then returned home. Either way, she had no way of knowing that a mysterious man in a dark hoodie was pedaling a black bicycle toward her home a few minutes after 9 a.m. A retired woman who lived across the street saw him through her big bay window as she was sipping her morning coffee. She dropped her gaze momentarily, but the man was already gone when she looked up a few seconds later. At approximately 9:15 a.m., he looked up and down the street, dropped the bike, and walked up to the front door carrying a bouquet of roses. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely ring the doorbell. When Christina came to the door, he told her that the flowers were for her sister Lutina, but unbeknownst to her, he was just making sure that she was home alone. When Christina told him that Lutina wasn't there, he pulled a .22 caliber revolver from the flower box and forced her inside at gunpoint. Christina's fiancé, Bradley Post, called and texted later that morning to see how the interview went, but she never got back to him, and he decided to swing by the house to check on her around 11 a.m. The front door was locked, so he walked around to the side of the house and entered through the back door, which Christina usually left unlocked. The house was eerily dark and quiet when he walked in. He assumed that she was in the shower or getting dressed in the bedroom, but he immediately noticed two things that were definitely out of the ordinary. First, the hallway and living room floors were strewn with rose petals, stems, and leaves. And second, the house smelled like paint thinner or industrial-grade insecticide. Bradley Post walked down the hall and looked into the bedroom, and to his horror, he saw his fiancée, Christina, lying on her back in a large pool of blood. Her eyes were open, but he instinctively knew she was already dead. Once the crime scene was secured, sheriff's deputies began searching the home for potential clues. In the living room, they found a laptop, a number of flash drives, and a Ziploc baggie that contained a mysterious white powder that, according to some sources, was later identified as cocaine. Deputies also found 2 envelopes containing $500 on a table in the hallway, as well as a single-shot handgun in a suitcase in the bedroom. Later, tests conducted by crime scene technicians revealed traces of blood in multiple rooms. It looked like the killer had cleaned the home with paint thinner after murdering Christina. Investigators weren't sure if the rose petals had been spread throughout the home intentionally or whether the victim was holding them when she was attacked. In the early going, the seasoned investigators were pretty sure the killer knew Christina and bore some deep-seated animosity towards her. Needless to say, her ex, John Mello, was a person of interest. But he adamantly denied having anything to do with her death, and investigators knew he couldn't have done it because he was in Italy at the time. However, they knew he could have hired someone else to kill her. If so, he could have been motivated by his desire to put an end to the contentious custody battle once and for all. Of course, Bradley Post was also a person of interest, but he was cleared of any involvement relatively quickly. Investigators weren't sure who killed Christina or why, but the case took a number of unexpected twists in relatively short order. The first came when Bradley Post gave investigators permission to search his personal devices. To their surprise, they found hundreds of images of pornography. They also determined that he deleted a significant number of images at Christina's house immediately after calling 911. As such, the police arrested Bradley Post on October the 19th of 2021 and charged him with 7 counts of sexual exploitation of a minor and another count of criminal sexual conduct with. John Mello was eventually arrested too, but he was only charged with taking his daughter out of the country in violation of a court order. Another big breakthrough came when investigators found telling footage from a security camera across the street from Christina's house. Luckily, an SUV driving down Canebrake Drive triggered the motion-activated camera just as the mysterious man on the bicycle pedaled up the street, and shortly thereafter they found footage of another security camera which showed the man on the bike in the neighborhood shortly before Christina was killed. The investigation eventually led to a local man who managed some of John Mello's affairs while he was overseas. He was quickly ruled out as a suspect, but he unwittingly blew the case wide open when he casually mentioned another friend and associate of John Mello's named Zachary Hughes. The Department of Motor Vehicle Records showed that he owned a gold Ford Ranger, and lo and behold, the municipal camera captured footage of his pickup truck that day. More interestingly, it had a black bike in the bed of the truck. Later, investigators found the bike while searching Zach's house. They also took samples of his DNA, and it matched DNA extracted from the skin found under Christina's fingernails. Zachary Hughes turned himself in to the Greenville County Sheriff's deputies, and on November the 3rd of 2021, he was arrested and charged with murder and using a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. During a bond hearing in April of 2022, prosecutors reminded the court that Zach's DNA was found under Christina's fingernails and that he was seen entering the home the morning she was killed. Unsurprisingly, the judge ruled that he had to remain in custody until the end of the trial. At that point, it wasn't even clear when the trial might begin. But by the fall of 2023, Zach and John Mello were charged with first-degree harassment and conspiracy for allegedly publishing nude photographs of Christina without her permission. More than a year later, in February of 2025, attorneys for both sides finally presented their opening statements. Zach pleaded not guilty, but surprisingly, defense attorney Mark Moyer immediately admitted that he killed Christina Parcell. He also told the jury that Zach had been waiting to tell his side of the story for a very long time, and that he only acted out of fear for Aida's life, and that he didn't commit the murder because there was no malice in his heart. Afterward, the prosecution told the court that Zach did commit murder and that he had planned and executed the crime in a cold and calculated manner. Circuit Court Judge Patrick Fant III ultimately ruled that the allegations of abuse were inadmissible and couldn't be brought up in the trial because they were unsubstantiated and it didn't have any bearing on the killing itself. After the ruling, a Greenville County DNA analyst and medical examiner Dr. Claire Rose were among the first to testify.
And what was your conclusions of that? So for item 5A, which was a sample of swab from right handle brake of black Kona bicycle, my findings were the DNA obtained from item 5A is a mixture of a major male individual and at least one trace contributor. The major contributor matches the DNA of Zachary Hughes. A match between the DNA result of item 5A and the DNA of Zachary Hughes is approximately 2 septillion times more likely than a coincidental match to a random unrelated individual. Upon establishing Zachary Hughes as a contributor to this mixture based on the match statistics, Michael Manigault, Bradley Post, Alex Fields, and John Mello are excluded as contributors to the DNA obtained from item 5A.
So I'll refer you back to clippings of the right hand 2A.
Yes.
And compared to our known references there.
So the DNA obtained from item 2A is a mixture of at least 2 individuals, a major female and a minor male. Assuming Christina Parcell is the major contributor to this mixture based on this being an intimate sample, a match between the minor DNA result of item 2A and the DNA of Zachary Hughes is approximately 825 million times more likely than a coincidental match to a random unrelated individual. Michael Manigault, Bradley Post, Alex Fields, and John Mello are excluded as contributors to the DNA obtained from item 2A.
Later, a number of law enforcement officers took the stand as well.
So there is the first message, and it's in blue. So who's it from?
This is from John Mello.
All right, and what does that message say?
Up in WhatsApp, you was setting sorry.
In relation to this investigation, do you have any significant interpretation of that?
It says WhatsApp in there.
WhatsApp. So you derive. It's talking about WhatsApp.
It's talking about this application.
Okay. All right. And then the next one is, what's the date of that one?
The date is 4/17, April 17th, 2021.
At what time?
It's at 6:55 a.m.
And?
This is from John Mello. It says, secret phone number got I dude private Christina's.
All right. So how did you interpret that in relation to this investigation?
I interpret that as, dude, I've got Christina's private number.
Okay. And then what looks like 2 minutes later, what's the date on that?
The same date, April 17th, 21 at 6:57 a.m.
All right. And what does that one say?
This is a message from John Mello. It says, harass shit of her 5142. We can the 864 out 483.
So how did you interpret that in relation to this case?
I believe he's providing Christina's phone number, which I know ends in 5142. He's saying harass the shit out of her.
Back to the top. What is that first message there?
This is a message from John Mello on April 17th of 21 at 8:33 a.m. He sends a JPEG image. You can't tell, you don't know what the image is. It didn't recover the image, only that an image was sent.
All right, so why can't you recover the images?
Because it's encrypted. The fact that it was encrypted and the fact that it was deleted from his phone, the images weren't able to be recovered.
The next one?
The next one's from John Mello, same date at 8:33 a.m. It says, email please to this me photo.
And Zach Hughes' response?
Excellent, haha.
Next, Christina's retired neighbor described seeing the man on the bike on the morning of her death.
That morning of October 13th, 2021, what were you doing?
Having my morning coffee.
Is that what you typically do every morning?
Because my husband had gone back to work.
And are you currently working?
No,
Are you retired?
we're all retired.
Congratulations. So that morning, where do you usually take your morning coffee?
At the kitchen table. By the window,
By the window. And the window that you're referring to, what does it look out onto?
the Canebrake Drive?
All right. And is there a sidewalk that you can see?
Yes,
And if somebody were to walk or bike past you, would you be able to notice them?
yes,
That morning, are you familiar with Christina Parcells' daughter?
yes. I saw her taking her daughter to school that morning, walking.
So you saw Christina Parcells and her
That
daughter?
morning, yeah, going to school.
And how would they go to school and pass your house?
They walk up to the end of the street. The school's across the road.
Okay. And so about what time did you see them
It was
walking
like
to school?
7:30.
7:30? You testified that you saw Aida and Christina walk past you towards school. And around 8:15, were you still sitting there at your thing,
I was.
at your seat, at your table? Did you see anything of interest that day?
Yeah, I saw somebody on a bicycle.
All right. And so tell this jury what you would have seen from that vantage point right there.
There was a guy on the bicycle right here, dressed in all black with put a mask on his face.
So and so I see those two trees in the photo. Where was he about where those two trees were?
Right in between them.
Right in between them. And you can see through your plant right there and see him? All right. And so can you describe the person that you saw and about what time it was?
He was tall and skinny. He was on a black bicycle. He was all dressed in black. I did say his sweatshirt was gray, but it was a hectic day that day, very scary, and it was all black. And I glanced over and saw him, and then I finished reading what I was reading. I looked up, and I didn't see him anymore.
How would you see his face?
Because he kind of turned and then turned back.
And did he have gloves on?
Yes.
Or so he was wearing gloves when you saw him?
Well, he was putting them on.
Okay, he's putting his gloves on. And then after he put his gloves on, what did he do?
I guess he got back on the bike and started riding, but he wasn't riding fast enough to get down Canebrake. When I looked back up, I didn't see him anymore. I didn't see him go in or come out.
Now, did he put a mask or anything on before he left your vantage point?
Yes.
What did he put on?
A white mask.
And
a hat.
And a hat?
Well, the hood.
A hood? Or
The hood on his coat.
Let me ask you this. Is the person that you just described to this jury look like the person in that photo right there?
Yes.
How so?
It just does.
Is it the same color bike? Is it the same clothes? I need you to respond.
Yes. It's just scary.
Is it the same mask that you
Yes.
saw and put on? And is it the same type of hood or hat?
Yes.
Okay. And what about a backpack?
It's on there. It looks black.
Is that the same person that you saw that morning around 8:15?
Yes.
Afterward, Christina's fiancé, Bradley Post, testified about what he found when he entered her home that morning.
I went to the front door and rang the doorbell.
And were you able to enter?
No, she didn't answer.
So then what did you do?
I walked around the back door because frequently they'd leave the back door unlocked, and I walked into the back door.
What did you do when you walked inside the house?
It was dark, quiet, and so I walked back to, down the hallway to see if she was in the bathroom or the shower, and it was all dark. And I looked on the floor, and right at the entrance of the living room and off that hallway, there were petals from like a rose. And as I looked into the room, and I saw her on her back.
And when you saw her on her back, was there a lot of blood around the room?
Yes.
What did you do?
I walked over and yelled at her and then called 911.
As dramatic as the early testimony was, it paled in comparison to what the 33-year-old defendant Zachary Hughes told the court when he took the stand.
My oldest sister, Grace, was the most evil human being I've ever met in my life. She was 10 when she came into our family. The Russian government didn't tell us much about the kids, so we weren't aware of any, if any, behavioral issues there may have been. And there were many, but specifically with her. I would describe her without reservation as an affectionless psychopath. It wasn't that she was immoral, it was more that she was amoral. Knowing this is essential to understanding my reaction to what John began to tell me about Christina Parcell in April and May of 2021 after Aida had been taken back to Greenville. He started describing Christina Parcell's character and her personality. And as he was going through various points, he kept saying, Zach, I know you're not going to believe me. Like, I know this sounds overblown and dramatic, and you probably think I'm exaggerating. And under other circumstances, I would have, because John does, I mean, he's a big storyteller. And, you know, when people are talking about their exes, like, everyone thinks their ex is the Antichrist. So, of course, I was sort of predisposed to be biased against what he was telling me, except for the fact that point by point, everything he described about Christina Parcell was exactly the same as my sister Grace. He told me that Christina Parcell was a master manipulator. He said she can lie at the drop of the hat and you'll never know it. He said she was incredibly charming. He said she was incredibly intelligent and talented. He used to say she was smarter than he was, but that her biggest fault was that she was lazy. And she had this arrogance combined with her laziness that was essentially born out of the fact that she knew she never really had to work too hard at anything in life. And she could even sacrifice trust with people and tell them lies that could easily be found out, because ultimately she was completely confident in her ability to reel someone back in, no matter how bad she had burned them before. She had a history of using and manipulating men in order to get money and in offering sexual services in return. She admitted to being a pornographic actress and producing a film in South Carolina where she rubbed her feet on a man's penis. She admitted to using SugarDaddyForMe.com, where she sought out romantic relationships with older men with a clear emphasis on it being a trade, essentially a reciprocal thing, where she was seeking out to be taken care of financially. She said that she had a general disinterest in having children at the time, which is why that she gave up custody of her daughter to John Mello when her daughter was very young. Her lawyer took it.
Objection, Your Honor. I'm to sustain the objection.
Okay. What, if anything, did John ask you to do for him?
Given the extremely grave nature of John's concerns for his daughter, especially while she was in the custody of her mother, Christina Parcell, and potentially being exposed to her mother's boyfriend, Brad Post, who John believed was and is.
Objection.
Sustained. I instruct you to totally disregard the last comments made by this defendant.
And Zach, you would just, could you just tell this jury what John asked you to do?
Yes. Given his concerns, John asked me that if I believed his daughter was in grave danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $5,000?
What did you say when he asked you that?
I was shocked and insulted by the request, and I gave him an immediate and unequivocal no.
What was the second offer?
The second offer, he asked me again, if I became convinced that his daughter was in danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $10,000?
what did you, or how did you respond to that offer?
I told him, John, there's no amount of money that would ever tempt me to do something like this. And I told him I was insulted that he even thought that would be something I would consider. So I told him I would never do something like this for money. I told him the only way I would ever consider taking action like this is if I was absolutely convinced that his daughter was not only in danger, but that the only way to rescue her from that danger would be to take Christina Parcel's life.
Once you concluded, believed absolutely this was what you had to do, did you go about planning?
Yes, I planned very carefully to make sure, one, like I said, that no one else would be involved in this. And two, I knew that if I tried to do this and failed, it would only be worse for Aida.
And consistent with the court's instructions, why did you believe it'd be worse for Aida?
Because I believed that if I was discovered doing this, it would connect me to John Mello. And I believed, and I still believe, that he's a great father and he is Aida's best shot at having a happy and safe childhood.
Let's talk about the planning. Did you get a gun?
Yes.
At the time, were you also carrying your own firearm?
Yes, I had a concealed weapons permit at the time, so I generally would always be carrying a 9mm concealed weapon on my person for personal protection.
Did you get another firearm for this?
Yes, I did.
What type of firearm did you get?
It was a .22 caliber revolver.
Did you also get a knife?
Yes, I did.
Did you originally plan to do this on October the 12th?
Yes.
Zach, consistent with the court's instructions, describe to the jury why you didn't do it on October the 12th.
I woke up that day and I just felt such reluctance, and something in my gut told me it wasn't the right day. And I waited one more day. Like I said, I had wrestled with this for months. I had come to the point where rationally I knew that the only way Aida was going to be saved from what she was enduring was for me to take this route. I knew that. But there's another element, a human element, which is just so reluctant and revulsed by the idea of taking a human life. So I had prayed a great deal about this. I had prayed like I'd never prayed before, because even knowing that logically this was the right thing to do, it didn't satisfy that emotional and human aspect where I felt that I needed permission to do this. And I was so terrified that somehow I might be doing the wrong thing. Like I knew that it was right logically, but there's the emotional aspect was just reeling against this idea. And more so because she was a woman. I was raised to always protect my sisters and mother, and I opened doors for women growing up. So this idea was just repugnant to me, even though I believed it was necessary to save a child. So on that morning, I took a bunch of roses and I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell. And I was shaking and freaking out at this point because there was nowhere I wanted to be less than at that house on that morning. And when I rang the doorbell, the door opened and a woman came to the front. And I thought it was Christina Parcell, but I wanted to make sure. And I also wanted to make sure that no one else was home. So I told her that while I was holding the box and the roses that I had a delivery for Lutina Parcell, her sister. And she told me that Lutina wasn't home. So at this point I realized that Christina was at the house alone. And I handed her the roses, and I took the revolver out of the box and I pointed it at her, and I told her to be quiet and to go back into the house, which she did. And I followed her into the house and I shut the door. And I was experiencing such anxiety that my body wasn't really doing what I was telling it to do anymore. Like when I realized that I couldn't use the gun, which was unloaded at this point, my plan had been to try to knock her unconscious because I didn't want to cause her or anyone any pain. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to save Aida and to make sure that no one else who was a bystander would be involved in this or could be endangered in any way. So I tried, while she was holding the roses, to strike her on the head and knock her unconscious. But my body was fighting me because even though I knew who she was and what she was doing and the danger that was putting Aida in, I was still looking at her and I was seeing a sympathetic figure. I was seeing a woman, and I had always been taught never to hurt a woman, to always protect women and children. So when I went to strike her with the gun, my hand didn't really do what I was trying to tell it to. I essentially pulled my strike. It felt like a time I had been cliff jumping with friends. I have a big fear of heights, and there was a 30-foot face that you could jump off and jump into a deep pool of water, and when I would run up to the edge, I would try to get a running start and jump off the edge, and I just couldn't. Like, my body would stop me against my will. And I had to try to do this 10 or 15 or 20 times before I could actually get myself to go over the edge. So when I struck her on the head with the pistol, that's what happened. It didn't knock her unconscious, and I hardly struck her at all, to be honest. So I tried again, and the same thing happened. I just couldn't bring myself to strike her. And at this point, she realized that I was hesitating, and she began to try to move herself and to get away and to fight back. And during this period of time, the roses had dropped and the petals and stems had scattered. And as I was hesitating, I realized that the situation was quickly getting out of control. And if I didn't pull myself together and act soon, this was all going to end up terribly for Aida, because what was happening to her would never be uncovered. So I pulled out the knife I was wearing. And even though I knew I wasn't going to be able to strike her with any amount of force, I still tried. So I started striking her, though my strikes were pulled. And I think the knife made contact with her, but it wasn't stopping her, and it wasn't inflicting anything that could be a fatal blow. And she started to fight back. She realized I was hesitating, and it became a struggle. And in this struggle, all I could do was try to overcome this resistance I had towards doing this thing. Even though I knew it was right, I still had this physical and emotional resistance to doing it. So I just kept striking her until finally we fell on the floor. And at this point, I had just tried to take my mind out of it and just try to get through this and finish it as quickly as possible, because I realized that it was only becoming prolonged, and I had to do this in order to save Aida. So I don't remember how many times I struck her. I just remember that when it finished, we were on the ground, and I stopped striking her when she stopped struggling. And at this point, I stood up, and I was still freaking out, and I was in kind of a daze. And I was just trying to pull myself together and figure out what I needed to do to leave the house. And again, I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave anything behind that would connect me to it, because then I believe John would be connected to it, and it would only further put Aida in danger, because I didn't know if Christina Parcell was the only person involved in what was happening to Aida. And she wasn't. So I quickly looked around to make sure I hadn't left a mask or a glove, and I started to pick up the rose petals and realized that I just didn't have time to do that. Again, I was concerned that a neighbor might have heard the commotion and that a neighbor might come by to investigate, and I didn't want that. So I drew the blinds and I moved her body away from the door, which had windows, because I didn't want someone to come to the door and see her. Before I left, when I realized that I had probably left my DNA there, despite my effort not to, I prayed again and just said that I believe that what I've done is the right thing, and I believe that I did it for the right reason. But if it's your will that I be connected to this, then I will turn myself in, and I will own up to what I've done, and I'll take responsibility for it, because I believed that it was the right thing. And then I left.
Zach blatantly and repeatedly defied the judge's orders by mentioning that he believed Christina and Bradley Post were abusing Aida. After reprimanding Zach and instructing the jury to dismiss what he said on more than one occasion, Judge Fant eventually stopped the trial and found him in contempt of court. All told, the high-profile trial only lasted 8 days. After closing arguments, the jury only needed 3 hours to reach their verdict.
As to the charge of murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of burglary first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of harassment first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of harassment second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. As to the charge of conspiracy to commit harassment first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of conspiracy to commit harassment second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Signed by our foreperson.
Afterward, Christina's sister and Zach's father read 2 very different impact statements.
Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to speak a few words on my son's behalf. The trial is over. A verdict's been rendered, and we accept that. What I want to speak to, because I understand this is the sentencing phase of the trial, where you have some parameter of your sentence. My son is probably, in my lifetime, and I've run into some pretty amazing people, and this is going to be seen as a bias from the father, but he has got such a strong moral compass and fortitude and desire for the truth in his life than really anyone I've ever met. He actually eclipses a lot of those things that I aspire to myself. It's what makes his music so incredibly meaningful, because as a musician, and there are some world-class musicians sitting here today, colleagues of Zach's, what makes a musician's art come through is what's the essence of who they are. It's not something you can fake. When you hear it, you know it's a fake. When you hear music that causes people in a room to weep, you know it's coming from something inside that person that you cannot describe. Bettina, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm not supposed to mention her name. I'm sorry. But I want you to know, Zach felt compelled to do what he did because of what he would quote Edmund Burke on this: the only thing necessary for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. And his truthful telling of what happened, I mean, he sat there and he didn't hold anything back that would benefit his portrayal to this court. He's just as brutally honest with himself as he is with other people.
Zachary David Hughes, indictment 2022 GS 2302194, indictment for murder. You're to be committed to the State Department of Corrections for life.
As of May 2025, 68-year-old Bradley Post was in custody awaiting a trial in which he and his attorneys will have to answer to the charges of sexually exploiting a and criminal sexual conduct with a. Sadly, John and Christina's daughter, Aida, was allegedly one of his victims.